seems the California primary might be important to the Republicans. It's 15% of the delegates, and certainly in his opposition to wars and to the military-industrial complex. He's carried the banner of Eisenhower on that issue, and certainly in his opposition, this was my last book, Great American Stick-Up was all about, in his opposition to this really huge swindle of $10 trillion being transferred through different mechanisms to make the banks whole while screwing over everyone else. Ron Paul has been a very consistent voice, and along with Dennis Kucinich, who unfortunately will not be in the new Congress, pushed through a bill to require the auditing of the Federal Reserve the first time. That has happened, and that's how we learned about trillions that were passed in secret to the banks. So, you know, since I'm a contributing editor of The Nation, but I've been beaten over the head there for the last 5 months because I dared to say something nice about Ron Paul. So it's very nice to come to Topanga and know in this broader, what did you say? It's in the heart, not in, okay, so I'm exonerated here. How politically correct. I took the topic seriously. In fact, I might have invented the topic. I'm not sure. But I think it's a very important one, and I do want to say something about it. When I look back at American history, and I know we've got a terrible history, we were imperialists from day one, and you know, racist from day one, and we're all familiar, you don't need a lecture about that. But there was a really beautiful idea at the center of the whole American Revolution. And yes, it was, I'll give the old caveats and everything, but there was a notion of everyman, in the sense of the yeoman was the center of this Republican experiment. And that the yeoman, the tiller of land basically, the small artisan, the worker, these people had to have political power. And they had to be the center of political power. That's why we have all these rules of what you can or cannot do to them. And it was, the first time really codified in that way. It was very important, and we should not let go of it. And so this whole notion that the Tocqueville celebrated after, what have you, of this, basically a society of stakeholders making decisions was very much built into our Constitution. Unfortunately, as I've said, there were very severe racist limitations on the stakeholders, but there was an ideal in this thing of every man. And if you go back to it, the Constitution, the system of government did not have the kind of concentration of power that we have now. That would have been thought to be obscene. There was suspicion of a strong federal government. There was certainly no idea of mass media owned by a handful of wealthy corporations. The free press that was enshrined in the Constitution was available to anyone. The only time you find it is when you go to a place like Topanga, where people still believe in leaflets. The town crier, and after all, that was the press, right? Anyone could be the press, and certainly free speech was critical. And the whole notion of a leveling of the participation as far as their income was very basic to the ideal, not always the practice, but certainly the ideal. Another idea that was absolutely critical to it was the notion that the Republic and the Empire could not coexist together. And this was the lesson of Rome, it was the lesson of the French, it was the lesson of the English. It's why we had an American Revolution, that you cannot be a republic of roughly independent citizens and be an empire. Because they recognize something that we've learned painfully over the years, that when you go to war, truth is the first casualty. You cannot control events, you cannot, George Washington, in his farewell address, which is something he got to work on for 8 years, he thought he'd only be there one term, and he showed it to other people, famous people that we know about. In his farewell address, he said something that I don't know why it's not been noted more by peace activists. But here was this great general who, like Eisenhower, the great general, warned about, in his words, the impostures of pretended patriotism. That's George Washington. I don't know why that's not taught in the schools. It's in his farewell address. The impostures of pretended patriotism. And he talked about influencing events through gentle means in foreign policy, not seeking power over any other people, any other nation. Incredibly important words. Why? Because if you go down the road of empire, you will lose the republic. Lying will be the norm. The concentration of privilege and power will be the norm, and corruption will be the norm. And so if you think of that heritage, those were really two critical components. The individual was the center of power, the individual was empowered, and so much so that we have this incredible suspicion of the central government. And then same token, as I say, a belief in a citizen army in a real sense, a very limited sense of these militias, and a rejection of an imperial model. And then we came to lose that. And in the process of losing that, we armed one side against the forces of this democracy that had been launched. And that was the side of what we now think of as the military-industrial complex. It's the profiteers, it's the people, whether they send armies or just go and follow armies, that exploit resources around the world, exploit labor, minerals, and what have you around the world, build empire. And on the other hand, you have people's resistance in this country, going back to the founders, using those rights of the Bill of Rights and others to try to establish a countervailing power to form unions, develop movements for people's rights, whether women's rights, gay rights, the civil rights movement, and so forth. And so that's been the struggle. And then we had this myopic period after World War II where it seemed like it was over. And we were deluded by a false sense of reality, because what happened, people forget, I'm older. I think finally I knew I'd come to Topanga and probably be one of the older guys. It's finally happened. I think I've been doing this for about 50 years. But I was born in '36, okay? And so I have, my parents, my father lost his job the day I was born, and my parents weren't married. I won't go through the whole hard luck story, but I have very vivid memory of that period. And I do remember, one thing that happened is we didn't really solve those problems. What happened is we had the war. And the war did two things. It mobilized the American workforce and dealt with in a way that we haven't been willing to do with this recession. A real stimulus package. It brought women, brought minorities up from the South. That's why you have black people living in places like Oakland in any number. They came to work in the defense industry and so forth. And so we had this opening up of the American workforce in a very profound way. And at the same time, our competitors in the world where every single industrial nation was destroyed. So we emerged from the Second World War with a burst of democratic experience. Even the military came to be desegregated. I think it was Truman's order to desegregate the Navy in 1947 as a matter of necessity. So that's really the trigger. You had a kind of this democratic outburst and strong unions and migration of people and so forth. I'm oversimplifying. And you also had a free ride, because you had the economy. We always, yes, we are blessed. We're a virgin nation. Our land is relatively unexploited. We have a lot of mineral wealth. We're underpopulated by world standards. We all know that. But that we had this boost of into this unusual period as a result of World War II, where in fact we were the only ones who could produce anything, because the Germans and the Japanese and everything, they'd been leveled. Their infrastructure had been leveled, and we were in this new, unique, strong position, and we could develop all these trade patterns. As a result, we had an illusion then, for the years that I went to high school and college, the slogan then, they wouldn't put the racist, but they should have. It was free, white, and 21. They should have said male also. And the assumption was, you were growing up, I remember when I was a kid, God, first of all, the fact that I could speak English without an accent, I knew I was home free, then, going to a good high school in the Bronx, where the schools really worked, and then going to a great school like City College in New York, where textbooks used to be free. At one point, Colin Powell was in my class at City College, and so he has chronicled those wonderful days when we actually cared about the poor, and have settlement houses and education programs and all the stuff that would be considered wild socialist, communist things. Now we had this our norm, and teachers got paid and so forth. So we went through this period in which the class differences tended to be submerged, and they were used to undermine unions and to develop a false consciousness. Because the fact is, we were in the catbird seat as a nation. what we produce, people wanted to buy, and so forth. What has happened, in particularly the last couple of decades, has been the severe erosion of all that. We have difficulty producing things that people want. We have enormous shift in the redistribution of income in the wrong direction. We have development of very severe class differences compared to that earlier period. At the same time, we've destroyed the institutions that might have provided balance, for instance, the trade union movement in particular. And so as a result, we've reached a point where at the same time as these other nations are now competitors and can beat us and can organize their labor and so forth, we no longer have that unique advantage. We have a failing educational system. We have centers of concentrated wealth. Okay, where does that leave us? I'll wind this up because I know I'm going to get the hook in a minute. If I think about it today, where we are today, we're in a period of incredible crisis because the old imperial model is now recognized not to work. You know, you can't really seize the oil. It turns out to be counterproductive. That was the lesson of Iraq. If you really want to know the lesson. Remember, the oil was going to pay for it?
Right.
It was this pipe dream once again. It doesn't work. In fact, the Chinese communists, you remember all those years we spent arguing about if you don't stop them in Vietnam, you'll have to stop them in San Diego? You know? And really distinguished professors over there at UCLA. I like picking on UCLA because I'm teaching USC, but I remember being a teacher and saying, oh no, you know, we don't stop because Vietnam is not about Vietnam, it's about China. And, you know, if you don't stop them, all those Chinese will be in San Diego, they'll be running everywhere. Well, they are in San Diego. You know, they're in Costco and Walmart, you know, they're all over the bloody place, you know. And the fact of the matter is the whole thing was, of course, a fallacy. But on that basis, we realized it's not productive. It's not cost effective. You pay for this military, we pay as much as the entire world combined. We can conquer places, and then what do you do with it? And then what happens? The Chinese communists have turned out to be better capitalists than our own. They go in and they make deals. They buy it. They buy it from the Australians, they buy it throughout Africa, they buy it everywhere, and they're being the old pirates of you know, capitalism, and we're playing an old game, okay? And it doesn't work, and so you see it in Iraq, and of course you see it elsewhere. And so we're up against a harsh reality here. And I'm going to end on this, but I think the topic is really the most pressing one. Because what the false patriotism that Washington warned against is an appeal to the nation that doesn't really exist. You know, I go to a lot of ball games, you know. I'm an Oakland Raider fan, and I'm a Laker. I would be at the Laker game tonight, but Topanga comes first. But anyway, we go there, and we all get these great renditions of the Star Spangled Banner, and everybody for a moment, you know, it's wonderful. What is the nation state now? No one wants to raise that question. And you have a dramatic indication of it every day in the news reports. Unemployment, right, still up there, 8.3%, and the jobs that have come back are not the good jobs. And they can't support that middle-class lifestyle that everybody knows is the basis of democracy, okay? And the housing situation is in the toilet, you know? And we have a home mortgage crisis, and nothing has been done for these people. And so what has happened is that almost 50 million Americans have either lost their homes or they're deeply underwater. Hispanic, Latino wealth, not income, wealth has gone down 64%. Pew Research Center figures. African American wealth has gone down 54%. Okay? That's wiped out the gains, the economic gains for those communities of the last decades. All right? So we have this incredibly abysmal economy. You know, we can't train people to be effective. We can't do the kind of programs that need to be done. We got a hole opposite City Hall in downtown LA. I happen to live downtown. I've been looking at that hole. Who would have ever thought in the middle of a deep recession you can't fill a goddamn hole? It's supposed to be where the federal building is, in case you're unaware of it. You know, and you know, the idea that you can't even put up a building there, create some construction jobs in the middle of a deep recession is unbelievable. Okay, so we have this situation where the average person is hurting enormously. That's why they turn to the Tea Party. That's why they vote for Republicans. That's why they do everything, you know, out of false consciousness. You know, particularly those white males. I don't know, I keep hearing these white males, they're animals. Most of the white males I know are pretty decent people. You know, and I've traveled pretty extensively in this country. But there seems to be a hardcore of proto-fascist white males that are at the center of the Republican Party. At least that shows up in the voting. Other people seem to have come to their senses, women, minorities, etc. But anyway, what you have is this odd situation, and it has echoes in history, where patriotism, nationalism becomes something ugly. And it becomes a hunt for the scapegoat. You know, it becomes nasty. And let's blame immigrants, let's blame gays, let's blame women, uppity women. You know, let's blame minorities there, let's blame welfare mothers. That becomes the thing of patriotism. Not checking the main thing you should ask about: who, what groups, what people are being served by this nation state. What is this America we're pledging allegiance to? And the other side of the daily story is what's happened to the stock market. The banks have been made whole. The big corporations have been made whole. They're operating freely around the world. They have the protection of the U.S. military. Right. Everybody in the world knows, yeah, Uncle Sam will intervene for them. Won't intervene for the homeowner losing their house or people who have jobs. But yeah, we'll send the troops out to protect Exxon, you know, so forth and so on. And so you have this dichotomy where the nation state works splendidly as a backup for the multinational corporations that are operating with impunity throughout the world, making record profits. And, you know, GE used to be as American as apple pie, right? What's good for GE is good for America. Ronald Reagan worked for GE, was one of them. You know, at the end of Reagan's term, Reagan said GE disappointed him. And he turned on GE. This is in Don Regan's book, his Treasury Secretary, because they become another company. Because GE wasn't making light bulbs and better refrigerators. GE got into home mortgages. GE Capital was responsible for 70–80% of their profit, and their operations were international. 2 out of 3 of their jobs now are abroad. 82% of their profit is parked abroad. Look at old quintessential GE. General Motors. General Motors Acceptance Corporation was doing all the same financial finagling and making most of their money. They had to be separated from General Motors for General Motors to be saved. They're now Ally Bank, which, by the way, advertises on public, it's promoted on public radio. So you have this dichotomy. The question really is, that has to be answered politically, whether by Greens, by the Peace Movement, by Democrats, is what is this nation that we're supporting, and who does the nation serve? And we know because we know about finance, campaign finance laws, we know about the super PACs, we know about the role of the money, we know about the concentration of the media, we know about the effect of lobbying in Washington, how we got financial deregulation that Clinton signed off on, the Financial Services Modernization Act, the Commodity Futures Modernization Act, which made all these derivatives possible, signed off by a Democratic president. And some irony, as I pointed out in my column today, the new spokesperson for Goldman Sachs, who's going to explain why this lone, brave person who spoke up, Greg Smith, is not such a real important person. He was only a vice president. You know, that guy was working in the Clinton administration and the Obama administration, working on financial radical deregulation. He's now with Goldman Sachs in time to put out this fire. So the basic question, and the topic tonight, which I'll end on, is what is our connection to the nation? And to my mind, if the nation only serves that elite, and thank God for the Occupy movement for doing something that all of us, ever since, you know, I'm going to veto Marcantoni, who want to talk about a great congressman, you know, ever since some of the old populists, Henry Wallace, you know, died, I haven't seen anyone, any movement come along in this country. Maybe I'll give Martin Luther King and the, you know, poverty speeches a lot of credit. But what Occupy did, much to my amazement, you know, much against my own skepticism, was force this issue of income disparity, the 1%, into the national dialogue in a way it never